Well, hello, hello. We are getting started. It is day two of B&H Wildlife Week. Super excited to be here today. My name is Michael Hollander. I'm on the B&H Creative Partnerships and Marketing teams. And today is going to be about conservation and all that beauty in wildlife. And we have two people kicking off the day for us. And we're starting with a good dear friend, David Wilder. David is a landscape photographer and a wildlife photographer based in Alberta. He is lucky to call the Canadian Rockies his home. So I know all of you out there are going to be jealous of that. You know, wherever we are stuck at home, stuck on YouTube today watching, David's going to bring us some amazing and incredible imagery. And I'm super excited to pass it over to him. Some quick ground rules. All the B&H staff is there in the comments with you, so please bring all your questions, add them to the comments, and we will do our best to bring them to David. If you have specific questions, I'll do my best to interject and ask David to clarify anything. But all those good and juicy general questions, we're going to hold off until the end. So please jump in. Let's get it all started. David, take it away.
Hey, Mike, thanks for that intro. And I just want to say hello to everybody tuning in. I'm so happy to be here with all of you and talk about some of my favorite things, which is wildlife. And like we were talking about, keeping it wild and making sure that we're keeping everything in the best interest of wildlife. To give a little backstory history about myself, I was born actually down in Texas and came up to Canada when I was a young kid with my grandparents, and we moved to Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And like Mike was saying, I'm right next to the Rockies, so we get all these opportunities to, go to the mountains in a day trip. Banff National Park is an hour from my front door, so I feel super blessed that I got such a beautiful landscape to go explore and play with. And with that landscape comes amazing wildlife. We've got everything from fox and deer and elk and bears and wolves and like you name it, we've got it. And if I go the other way to the prairies, we get all sorts of crazy birds like owls, barn owls, and great grays. So I feel super lucky to be out in this area. I've been shooting for the better part of my life. 13 was when I picked up my first camera, started taking photos of, friends and family snowboarding and skiing. And that evolved into taking photos of people. I left Calgary for a little bit to go to college. And then when I returned, I really dove into landscape and wildlife photography. So for the last 15 years, I've been focusing on that. And you can't tear me away from the mountains, or you can't tear me away from somewhere where it's beautiful to go photograph. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. In today's session, like Mike was saying, and we're going to focus on wildlife. We're going to see some images and talk about some stories behind those images, and hopefully have some great conversation about how we can better protect our wildlife. So without further ado, let's jump into that. Bring up a slide here. All right, so keeping it wild, let's take a look at some of the images. All of these are actually taken over the last year. A lot of my work has evolved over the last year to involve wildlife. I've always shot wildlife when it was there. I was up early taking a shot in the morning of sunrise, and I would happen to come across wildlife. But the last year, I've really focused on going out with the intent of, photographing these beautiful animals that are just as beautiful as the landscape. So our intro card photo, this is from Churchill last year in October, November. This was my first trip up to Churchill. I had never been out there. And this place is just another world. Getting in there in the first place, you can only get in there by train or by plane. And so that in itself was a whole fun experience. But this was actually on day one. My goal was to see a big male polar bear, and within a couple hours of getting into Churchill, we got out on the land with our guides from Discover Churchill, and we found this big male just sleeping on his patch of sand on this beach. It was a beautiful moment. And he got up and he started wandering around, and we didn't know at the time, but just over this little kind of hill that he's on, there was a carcass of probably a seal, and it was pretty much down to the bone, but he walked over and started munching on it. But it just gave these moments of a perfect like sky and this contrast. It was just a moment like that first one, it almost brought tears to my eyes. And so, you know, being out on the land, the first thing that comes to mind is like we're in their territory. So we're staying really far away. We're about 50 yards away from this animal at the most or the minimum. And we're all using our, you know, super long lenses. So like for myself, I'm using the 200 to 600 lens and you know, with a teleconverter on it at some time. So this was, you know, at 600, and just watching this animal not even care, like it's such a powerful animal and it knew that we were there as a group, but it was just minding its own business. We were far enough away to, you know, give it its space, and it was just a beautiful moment for that first introduction to wild polar bears. Moving on to the next shot, this is that same trip in Churchill, and you know, this was a life-changing experience, like seeing these animals and seeing what they go through just to survive. And you know, this is the beginning of their ice season. As we're getting there, the ice is starting to form in Churchill. And fun fact for those who haven't heard about Churchill, Manitoba, it's where the ice freezes in the Canadian Arctic first. So it gets a mix of fresh water and that salt water. And because of that fresh water coming in from the rivers, it actually freezes in this area first. So the bears know to stay around Churchill because it's going to be their first opportunity to get out on the ice and start hunting. So the rest of the time during the summer, they're conserving energy, trying not to burn calories, especially those big old males. The more they move, the harder it's going to be for them to, you know, get that first seal at the beginning of the season. So they're basically just lounging around in and around Churchill and the, you know, wildlife conservation areas. But to see that first big male, and then, you know, a few days later to see a mom and her cubs. The locals have actually named this this mama Peanut, and some of the friends that I was out there with saw Peanut the year before with the same two cubs. And so it's kind of cool to be able to see them grow up and get bigger and bigger. So this was a moment you can see with my camera on the shot there on the left and me pointing. That's where they are. So they're approximately 75 to 100 yards away. And you know, that reach of that zoom lens with the teleconverter on it can really give a great length to be able to reach out and feel like you're right there with these animals. This moment was just, I feel like it's a snow globe, and just watching them interact. Before, they were laying down and they were nuzzling each other's noses and they were just yawning and sleeping there on the rock. It was a really amazing moment, and just saw them get up and kind of saunter off towards the ice, trying to go see if it was hard enough to walk on again. And just seeing those habits was really cool. And it really started to open my mind into why it's so important for us to care about these animals. It's our impact on the environment is what's impacting their ability to stay alive. And they don't have the voice to be able to talk about that. So seeing this, getting these images for people to kind of relate, I think is a huge part of why I do wildlife photography now. Is I've started to realize that I can at least be part of that voice for these animals.
I'm going to jump in with a quick question. We're still on polar bears. So Thomas is asking about using spot or full metering modes. And also, if you could touch upon compensating for the bright snow and the sky. Are you overexposing? Are you underexposing to compensate for those?
It's a great question. That is something I had to learn, do a little research moving up to going to Churchill, especially being in this vast place with very little contrast, especially with an animal that had very little contrast as well, to be able to get it to focus and to meter. So what I was using and what I found success with was not a spot metering, but pretty much a wide metering of the entire scene, because I found that if I were to meter on one specific spot, if I caught the meter maybe on an eye or a dark spot of skin, or maybe shooting through some trees, and I catch a limb of something, it might blow out the image. And on the flip side, if I'm shooting in this wide open area and I have too much darkness around me, sometimes it was tempting to go back to that spot meter mode. But I found the bulk of the success was using like the whole metering area to be able to focus and catch exposure. What I was also doing was I was using compensation as well. I would typically do half a stop higher, maybe a full stop, depending on how bright the day was, because the camera itself wanted to keep it really dark as of an exposure because it was so bright with all this white. So you had to kind of help the camera learn that you wanted a little bit brighter than what it thought it was. So like this scenario specifically, compensation up a half a stop to really help out. And focus as well. I'll throw that in there as well. For focus, I was using all sorts of modes, really depending on the moment. And I found great success using the sports tracking. So I could grab onto a face, and even though I might shake a little bit or move a little bit if I was doing handheld or even on the gimbal there, it was still able to track well. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question for you.
Yes, I think you did. I just want to give a quick shout to everyone in the room. We have people from Virginia, Angela, Roger's watching from Miami, Florida, Christopher's in Arizona, Mario's in Dayton, Ohio. People are talking about their favorite wildlife to shoot. Some people are saying backyard bird photography. I think we can all relate. Thanks for saying so. Jenna, Amy said hawks outside of her house. That's incredible.
That's nice.
She's also considering a teleconverter. I know you're going to touch upon that in a little bit as well. What else? If you're still coming into the room, because I see a lot of views coming in, definitely ask those questions in the chat and we'll do our best to bring you the right answers. So, all right, jump right back in, David. Thanks.
No worries. Keep those questions coming. All right, so same trip. This was this whole trip was just insane. The opportunities to photograph were endless. I can't say enough about Discover Churchill. They were my guides. They helped us get on the ground and move around really quickly to find those moments. You can go out on those big buggies that people see, and those buggies give you certain access that you don't have normally. But a benefit to being on the ground, moving around, is you have the opportunity to really, get eye level with the animal, as well as, if there's a section that you're at that's, empty, you can move really quickly to another spot where you can find some wildlife. So super cool experience. This day, again, two completely different moments that were just insane. On the left, we have this cross fox. Now, this little guy, if you've ever seen a fox, they move quick and they don't stop for anything unless it's food or like trying to hear for another wild animal. So this little guy was bouncing around off the rocks into the snow. He finally got far enough away where he just sat for a moment and just was relaxing and just kind of looked back at all of us, and it was hilarious. You could just hear all the cameras going off as soon as he started looking at us. This guy was really far away as well, but we had a 600 millimeter focal length. And then I'm pretty cropped as well. I think a lot of people who are looking at wildlife photography, as a new hobby, or even just the general public looking at photos of wildlife, they don't necessarily know that a lot of the time these photos are cropped on top of having that reach. So, something that I typically like to do when I'm posting is talking about the gear used, and talking about the lens I use, that I'm not sitting right on top of an animal to get the shot. I'm actually quite a ways away and using a long lens with a camera that has high resolution, so I can crop a little bit. That gives me that ability to really give that animal its privacy, give it its space so it can act naturally. That's one of the biggest things I think I've learned over the years, and really started to focus on and understand the impact over the last year. So yeah, this crossfox, I am now not only loving bears, but I'm loving fox now, and they're just so cute. So got to throw one of these in here. I've got a new photo later on at the end of this slide as well. of a fox that I absolutely love. But the photo on the right, this is probably my most intense moment. Probably the moment that I was super excited about and nervous and trembling. We found this bear walking out on the beach. This is in an area where in Churchill they have a rock crushing plant quarry, and he started walking towards that quarry. So we positioned ourselves well ahead of him, about 100 yards, and he just was sauntering, parallel to us, and we were just kind of shooting over the hood of the car, and he turned and just started coming towards us. And I think this is that classic wildlife image, the animal looking straight down at you, coming at you. And I was so excited, so nervous, so like just ecstatic that this was happening, and I was doing everything I could to make sure I got the shot. So I didn't have the tripod out. This moment was happening so quickly that we literally pulled up, and I was braced against the hood of the car itself. And it was so cold out there, I didn't really have to worry about heat or anything kind of dissipating off of the hood of the car from the engine and get those weird waves that you get to distort. So it was pretty cold. I didn't have to worry about that, and just fired off a bunch of shots. As he started getting closer, that's when the guide, taps on the windshield and says, hop back in. We get back in the car and, roll up the windows and let it just kind of walk past us. And it went up this hill and into the bush. Since we found him in the rock quarry, the crushing area, we called him Crusher. And unfortunately, he got put in jail. In Churchill, if you don't know as well, they have what's called bear jail. If they get too close to town and start to come into town, they put out traps and they put them in a bear jail for a night or two. And then they put them out into the wild a little bit farther away from town. So he was a little bit of a bad boy. He got too close. So Parks Canada, rounded him up. It was kind of a funny story. All right. So we mentioned, somebody mentioned the backyard, bird photography, and, with the way the world is right now, we have to, embrace our backyards. And there's tons of wildlife that we can find right here, whether it's here in Calgary, Alberta, or I heard out in Florida, in Arizona. There's all sorts of wildlife that you can go out and find in your area. And you don't necessarily have to go traveling around the world or, around the country to go find it. And this is an example of something that we get here in Calgary. This shot was right in a little park, not too far from my house, probably like 20 minutes. Took about a 20-minute, 30-minute walk around the park to find this little guy. But this is a northern pygmy owl. He's about the size of a softball. You can think about a softball with wings. That's how big this little dude is. Super adorable. It was a bucket list shot for me. This was the very first time I've ever seen this animal, and I was so excited to see it. If you look at the photo on the right, you can see my camera on the gimbal. I've got the 2:600 and the teleconverter, the 1.4 that I was using. So I was sitting at 840 millimeters, and then this image is cropped a little bit. But if you look, it's hard to see, but if you look really close at that really tall tree in the middle, about halfway down, I don't know, about 3/4 of the way down, there's a little dot, and he's like super small and in there. And if it wasn't for like him making a little bit of a chirping noise or hooting noise, if you will, I would have never found him. There was one other photographer there also looking, and we were just so like enthralled when we saw him. And he's just hunting. He's looking off camera. I think he hears something in the little creek that's in front of us. And yeah, you don't have to be super close to get a great shot, especially if you've got the gear that helps you with that. So a telephoto lens, teleconverters definitely help. I shoot with the A7R4 because it has such a high resolution. It has a lot of give for cropping. You'll see cropping done on any camera when it comes to wildlife, but this just gives you so much without losing a lot. And my end goal is to, have these images up for people to share and see, to have people in their homes have these. So I want to have as much resolution as possible so that I can still print these after they're cropped and still look good on somebody's wall. So yeah, super amazing little moment, a little fur ball, a little baseball with fur. So talking about some backyard wildlife, this isn't my, right in my city, but this is pretty close. This is out in the Rockies, about an hour away from my place. And, came across a mother and two cub grizzlies. So this is a tiny grizzly cub. It just had freshly rained. I was out that morning trying to find something to photograph. It was definitely not going to be a landscape day because it was raining. It wasn't no chance of colorful sunrise. So I was looking for some wildlife and couldn't find anything. It was raining. I didn't think this was going to happen. I was actually ready to call it quits. So I was pulling into a little parking lot at the head of a trail. There's bathrooms or outhouses at most of these trailheads. And I went to get out and go use this outhouse. When I open the door and I hear these two little cubs just making these like grunting noises, and I'm looking around, can't see them, found them in a tree. And then I'll go, okay, there are cubs here. I know there's going to be a mama somewhere too. So we got back in the car. I got like 2 feet out of the car when I heard it. I got right back into the car, and the two cubs come out of the tree, and mama comes over this little berm, and they're just playing around. I'm the only one in this little parking lot. It's super early in the morning. This was back in June of last year. And so it's like sunrise is like 6 in the morning. So it's 6 or 7 a.m. And this is kind of like the dream moment. To say that because a lot of the time people in areas where you see bears will pull over on the side of the road. We call them bear jams up here. And it can get pretty hectic and scary, both for the people and for the wildlife. Bear jams can, have people unfortunately getting out of their cars and possibly getting, hurt by another car passing by, or getting too close to the wildlife, or even just like making the wildlife, nervous, whether it's an elk or it's a grizzly. So this was kind of like that holy grail moment. I'm not on the side of the road. I'm in this like hidden parking lot. So there's not going to be a crowd of people racing down when they see this bear. And so I had like an hour with these little guys, nobody else around, just me and the grizzlies and the cubs. And it was just this beautiful moment. And when this little guy stood up and started doing his little like looking around, I could not have been more happy. My goal is to, get people to fall in love with wildlife and to, see something that they care about in these little, beautiful animals. And when they do something, that's like a human trait or something that's adorable, it starts to tug on those heartstrings, and it gets us to realize that we need to care about these little guys. It was just such an adorable moment. And yeah, I love this photo. So little grizzlies, so cute. So talking about some birds and talking about going out to the prairies as opposed to the Rockies, because Calgary is right on that border between the prairies, foothills, and the Rocky Mountains. So out here we get all sorts of beautiful owls, bald eagles, hawks, falcons. My favorite thing to shoot, though, from the bird side of wildlife is owls. There's something about them that is just majestic and beautiful. No matter what owl you find, I feel like there's wisdom behind those eyes, and anyways, it's just beautiful animals. And so during the winter months, around like the January, December, November, sometimes depending on the migration, we get snowy owls, and these things are beautiful. And a lot like the earlier question about focus and exposure, they definitely get tricky to shoot because they're all white. This is a male, so less spots on this one. Females have a lot more spots, little like diamond or like arrow shape or heart shaped like dots all around their wings and their feathers. But gorgeous male. He was sitting up on this power pole. And, I had been out a few times already this season looking for snowy owls, and I got a handful of shots of them perched. And really, once you get one perched shot, they're all kind of the same. Like they sit on the power poles, or sometimes if you get really lucky, you find them on a tree or lower on a fence post. If they're on a fence post, good luck getting in photo range. And even with a long lens, they're going to fly off before you can get even, reasonably close to take a shot. On the power poles, they're sitting so high up that they don't really care about your existence. You could drive by in a car or ride by on a horse as a rancher, and they're not even going to notice you. But I was done taking shots of them on posts. I was like, okay, I'm going to wait this one out. I am going to sit out in this field. So I hopped off into this farming field that was right next to the road. There's no fences out in some of these areas. So I just, walked about 100 to 200 yards into this field and just plopped down in the snow. And it was cold. Like it was like -10 Celsius. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit. Sorry. It was cold, and like my butt was going numb, my legs were going numb, my pants were getting all soaked. I didn't think this one through very well, and I just waited, and suddenly I saw his head kind of bounce around, kind of looking or hearing for something in my general direction. And sure enough, he just swooped down and flew, and he got so low I had to lay down to get like this shot. I couldn't believe how low and quiet this guy was. He maybe flapped a couple times with his wings, a couple power moves, and just cruised, dead silent. All I could hear was the wind, and he just cruised. There was a vole, I think, dove into the hole like right in front of him. I think it was scurrying. I was so focused on trying to get an image that was sharp or in focus that I had to review all the images to actually see what happened. But he just cruised and then just banked off into the distance, and I lost him within like seconds. He just blended into all the white. But images like this, like, it's all about waiting, right? We hear stories or see stories on social media or on YouTube about people going out and baiting wild animals. And beyond my personal like sadness and frustration that comes out when I hear those stories, my general thought is we want it to be a natural moment, right? Looking back at an image, and if it's staged or if it's baited, how does that feel when you're sending that image out and telling a story about an animal? How does that make you feel, right? It's that's the way I look at it, is that I want it to be a pure, genuine moment. And I want to make sure that I'm not impacting this animal in a negative way. I want to make sure that whatever happens is on its own accord. And I think that's very important to keep in mind, that, we don't want to train these animals to think humans are a food source, or, stop them from hunting, because we don't know when they're going to get another meal. If we're giving them food, how are we going to know when it's actually going to go hunt again on its own, or when it's going to find food because we were too noisy around that animal? So something I think about every time I go out.
Thanks for touching upon that. I'm going to jump in real quick. So much
Yeah.
feedback on those two owl photos. I think the cuteness award definitely goes to the softball size one, but everyone is screaming about this one. What a moment you were able to catch. We have a couple of questions about tripods, monopods. When is the appropriate place to use them? Talking about handheld with these giant lenses. Give us your take on that.
Definitely. It's always a consideration, tripod, monopod, or handheld. And it's super situational for myself. So for moments like Churchill, when action's happening very quickly, you're in and out of the car, I try to use a tripod and gimbal setup. And I found great success when they were really far away, but not a lot of success when they were on the move. Like when they were stationary, bears, and I didn't have the freedom to, move from the front of the car to the back of the car, or get a little bit closer, a little bit farther away, or around a big item that was in the way, like a tree. And the speed was really important there. It was getting out of the car, getting into the car, because we were going to move to another spot. So handheld worked really well in that situation. With birds, especially if they're perched and you have the time, taking the gimbal out, taking the tripod out, monopod, anything that helps you stabilize is going to help you that much more, eliminate things like camera shake or your body shaking. It's going to give you a sharper image. Some tips that I've learned from my wildlife friends that I'm learning constantly from is especially like methods of how to hold the camera. If you're holding your arms far out in front of you, your hands are shaky, right? You have a lot of that motion because your weight is so far away from you. So a tip that I had learned and have put to great use is keeping everything nice and close. So bringing your hands in and trying to keep everything snug against your body, as well as keeping your camera actually smushed up against your face, using like a 3-point kind of system to be able to keep everything nice and steady for handheld. And the same thing with like a monopod or a tripod. The more weight you have kind of pressing down, not allowing it to jitter, helps with wind, helps with any kind of movement that you put on when you go to grab the camera. Just kind of getting it as stable as possible. With birds in flight, I find, depending on the moment, if I'm able to get the camera tripod out, I do that. And I always use a gimbal because it gives you that fluid motion. I tried originally with a ball head and learned that, especially with a long lens, the weight would drop really high, really quick on the front of the lens. And it was very hard to keep it in place. So yeah, it's situational, but definitely gives you a huge benefit having a gimbal, a tripod. Monopod is if you want to kind of work up to a set of legs and a gimbal. A monopod with a ball head is a great way to start as well. If you're just kind of walking around and you don't want to carry a bunch of heavy stuff, that would be a good spot to start.
Thanks for touching on that. What tripod are you using?
So right now I've got a Really Right Stuff. I can't remember the serial number name of it, but it's one of their big boys. It's definitely not a hiking one. It is definitely one, I could stand, I'm 5'7", and when it's fully extended, I can actually stand underneath it. Funny enough. But it's nice and heavy. It's got the weight to carry all this gear. I used to shoot on a digital SLR before, and it really needed all the weight support that it came with. But now with the bigger lenses, it definitely needs that again. And so that is the legs. The gimbal that I use is a Benro gimbal. I found it's super smooth, really easy to balance, doesn't have a lot of setup and need, which is great when you're getting out on the land and you're trying to get a quick shot. The biggest thing is just getting that shot in the first place, and the less you have to set up or think about, the better.
Great. One more question before we move on from this beautiful snowy owl. I know everyone's enjoying just looking at this pic. Bob is asking, how many keepers do you get and how many disregards do you get? So, not necessarily particular to this snowy owl, but in general, what are you looking at? How many photos are you coming home with? How many are you walking away with?
To be honest, in a session like this bird or this owl or, the bears here, probably keeping 1 to 5, right? If I'm really honest, it's probably 1 that I'm super happy with when it comes to sharpness, eye contact or pose. Like, the series from this exact photo, a couple, seconds more and the wings are clipped. Not even seconds, like literally frames, and the wings are clipped. A little bit farther back, and he's not parallel, like he's not super, he's kind of tilted forward. So sometimes it is literally just one shot out of maybe 60 that you're just cranking out really fast. And I'm okay with that because I'd rather have one, great shot than a whole bunch of okay shots. So I'm very picky in that process. Mike and I were talking yesterday about like the photo that I've been working on. I had to, step away and stop working on it. And same goes with, going out over and over. I got to go out and, wait for that perfect moment, not just shoot something for the sake of photographing it. So yeah, there are lots of images, but it boils down to probably 1, maximum 5.
Sounds good. All right, moving along.
All right. So Grizzlies. I love grizzlies. I love bears in general. And these boys, if you've seen a grizzly bear, especially up here in the Rockies, you probably see them do one thing over and over and over, and that's grazing. Right? Their whole purpose is to eat as much calories as possible every single day. And you know, just like the example of snowy owls or any owls kind of perched up on a pole. Once you've seen one bear grazing on some grass, you're kind of craving something more, something different. And so last year in September, I decided to head out to BC. The coast has what we call the Great Bear Rainforest. And out there we have all sorts of grizzlies, we have black bears, we have something called the spirit bear, which is a all white variant of a black bear. And I went out and just wanted to see if I could capture some bears going for fish and doing the salmon spawn and hunting or fishing, if you will. And so I went out to this area called the Toba Inlet. It's on the coast of BC. You got a boat in. You can't drive or plane there. You have to literally take a boat in and spend a couple days going into this area that was set up along this river to photograph bears. And so we're up in a blind. This thing is like a tree house set up probably 15 feet off the ground. And there's a few of these set at key positions on the river. And we're just waiting for a bear to arrive. Most that day, we saw about 6 different grizzlies, all males. Didn't seem to be any females. No cubs this year that I saw. I think there was a couple days later. But just waiting for these guys to come out of the woods and hop into the water and start fishing. And I chose this shot to share just because it gives you a really great perspective of just how far away they are. They can get pretty close as well, but we're in the safety of this hide. And we don't have any like fragrances on. Like they told us not even to wear like bug spray or high smelling deodorant to make sure that we're not bothering or interacting with these animals so that they're stay focused on what they're trying to do, which is find fish. If you look at the photo on the right there, you can see a couple trees and a little dot in between. That is this bear. And again, it looks like I'm pretty close to this animal. I could maybe, just looking at the photo on the left, might be on a trail and shooting with maybe a 70 millimeter lens. But in reality, I am, what is that? Probably 70 yards away ish. And I've got a teleconverter on a 1.4, the 600 lens, and the A7R 3 at this point. And I'm cropping in as well just to get that, closer look. But it's one of my favorite shots just because of the way the trees framed him, and you were able to see like just the water rushing and just the fur all wet. Super cool moment. There was a lot of photos. To that question about all the photos that you can get and which ones do you keep, I have from this a good 6,000 images between 2 days alone, and I've narrowed it down to let's say 100 that I like, and there's maybe 10 or so that I share openly because I really love them. So that kind of gives you an idea of like how much I've narrowed down, how much I've shot. But we spent hours out there standing on these blinds, waiting for something to show up, getting some action, and then waiting for hours again just for another bear to show up. But super cool. Definitely want to go back. Definitely want to support the people that organize these tours. And this is on First Nations land, so it's also supporting the people who live in these areas. The Caluce people are the ones who are guiding us. That's something also to keep in mind, that we're not just freely walking around in these areas. Like Churchill, you are going in with guides that are keeping you educated about the area, about the bears, and keeping you safe, making sure that you're aware at all times. Because if we're shooting down the camera, looking at one bear, they're making sure that there's not another one coming the other way. So definitely important to always make sure that you're going out with a guide and doing some research about how to go about it properly. So another beautiful owl here. We've got a few more slides left. This is a saw-whet owl. This guy is a little bit bigger than the last one with the northern pygmy owl. If that was a softball, this guy would be like, plus size softball. I don't know how to put it. He's about the size of a Coke can. So again, tricky to see, tricky to find. Usually nocturnal, but this one, decided to hang out during the day. And I have a love-hate with this image, and not so much hate, maybe a sadness that comes along with this image. And it's kind of the story behind the shot. So finding birds, you got to do a lot of research. And part of that research comes from websites and just understanding behaviors of animals. And this is a fairly rare, just like the pygmy owl, fairly rare owl to find. And when news got out that this owl was in a local park, things got a little crazy. And so I went out early one morning to look for this owl, and I couldn't find him. I actually came back and had a conversation with Mike that same day, and then went back out. And this was in the middle of the week. No, this was on Sunday. This was on a Sunday. I went back out. There were a handful of walkers in this park and a couple of photographer people walking around, birders like myself. And nobody, like, it wasn't super crazy or busy. I walk up and I walking down this path and I see this lady kind of wave at me, and she, kind of beckons me over. And sure enough, she goes, "There's a saw-whet." And she points up in the tree. And I see this little guy and I'm excited. I'm ecstatic. It's right next to a clear area. It's easy to photograph. Didn't have to worry too much about, the technical side of how am I going to photograph this. It was also right next to the walking path. So this is where it kind of got a little frustrating for myself and a little sad. We got our shots and we got these beautiful connections. You can see the details in its feathers around its face. Kind of looks like snowflakes. Like, happiest I've ever been with getting a shot. And suddenly more people start showing up. And I realized that this person that called me over had jumped on the phone and called and texted all the friends. And so all these other amateur photographers and birders and, people who love wildlife, and honestly, I would hope have the right intentions, started to gather. And this is where it kind of got sad for me. I had just had a conversation about, wildlife photography and respecting it that same day. And I'm having to, look at 20 people kind of, just rush to this one animal. So as soon as I started seeing this happen, I decided, you know what, I'm not going to contribute. I'm going to now leave. So there's one less person. And I started talking to a couple people that had, been there, like the lady that was there, one other person that joined fairly early on. I was like, "Oh, did you get your shots?" I'm like, "I can't wait to get mine, home and edit." Trying to encourage, people to, move. I've in the past gone very forward and confronted people about their actions. And you have to, say your piece, but also pick the opportunities. I've heard a couple of similar people in that scenario get very big backlash, from that moment. You have to stand up, but you also have to, keep safe. You don't want any people to maybe abuse you verbally or anything like that. So a very delicate moment. And I just decided that the best thing for this animal is to have one less person intruding on it. And so I removed myself from the scenario. Once I was able to get my shot very early on, I was happy and I left. And I think that's something that we have to all realize, that we are either part of what's good for this animal or part of what not. So kind of thinking about where that threshold is and moving along. So yeah, great image. For me, I was super happy about this image, but also the story I think is super important about what we do while we're around these animals. couple more slides left of some wildlife animals. This is probably one of my, not my best images, but it's one of my most important images because of how rare this animal is. This is a white grizzly. To give you context, the last time that a white grizzly was documented in the Rockies was the 70s. And this in a very different part of the Rockies from where I'm at. And so super rare. This bear got a lot of attention online. It hit the news a couple times, all over Facebook and Instagram. And so I, of course, wanted to, see this animal. I wanted to witness something that is rare. And I think it's okay to do that. But you have to make sure that, and for me, I had to make sure that it was something that I did respectfully for this animal. Parks Canada did all sorts of things like blocking off trails and stopping people from pulling over on the highway. I happened to be able to pull over at another trailhead, and I was looking all around this trailhead, thinking, okay, this bear might be here. This is kind of the general area. And funny enough, I was about to give up, and it's actually on a cliff edge across the highway, like 100 plus meters away. It's like over 100 yards up on a ridge. And I'm like, oh my God, there she is. And I pulled out the camera, took a few shots just to, show how rare these animals are and how important they are for us to be a part of the conversation about keeping them protected. So beautiful animal, super rare. It's crazy to think that this is just a variant like me having a red beard or dark hair or blonde hair. That's all that this is actually pretty cool to learn a little bit about this bear. I also got nicknamed Nakota as a friend, I think is what it is. So the last image that we have here is my most recent. This is literally just from a few days ago. I went out to the Rockies and was looking for anything again. I was, hoping to see wolves. Wolves are like my number one goal to see. I love wolves. I was that nerdy kid with a wolf t-shirt back in, elementary and junior high. So I've been looking for wolves, and I found instead this beautiful red fox. This little mama is just gorgeous. She's got a den in the Rockies that is cordoned off by Parks Canada. And I was walking down a walking path, and like I knew she was in the general area. And I mean, general area could be, 100 football fields wide, right? There's a lake, there's all sorts of spots that it could be. But I decided to shoot my shot, and I was walking down this path. Lots of people. This is a day use area. People with dogs and jogging and hiking. And sure enough, about 50 yards up, I hear these girls go, "Oh my God." And I knew, like, okay, this has got to be it. And so I see them turn towards me, and just around the trees, this little beauty pops out. So I sit down on my butt, get my camera out, and I shoot it from the distance. It goes across the path and into like the bush behind a big garbage bin. And I'm like, I don't know where it went. And I asked the girls, "Do you see it?" And they go, "It's right there." And I turn, and it came right towards me. It came from behind the bin and walked right past me. And this was a moment that I didn't think was going to happen, having a fox straight down, looking at me, running right past. So pulled out the camera, fired off as many photos as I could. This was with my 2-600, and I had to actually pull back a little bit to get it all in one frame. And yeah, it lasted 60 seconds to 2 minutes, just ran right past me, disappeared into the rocks. Yeah, it was just took my breath away, and super happy to have it on camera, and just a moment that I won't forget. So yeah, when you get lucky, you get lucky. And this is one of those moments. So yeah, those are the images that I had to share with everyone today. I'll stop sharing my screen here so we can continue on our conversation.
Thank you so much, David. Amazing imagery. Everyone is kind of going crazy in the comments. Really loving all that work.
Thank you.
But we have some good questions. So let's see, where do I want to start? I'll be the selfish one. we all love Sony cameras. I think there's a lot of Sony users out there. Someone was asking about getting your hands on the A1 yet. I want to know what your take is on that, because I don't think you have gotten your hands on it, but I do want to remind everyone our next session is with Charlotte Charlie Savely, and she's going to be talking about her experience specifically with wildlife and the A1. But David, talk to us about your Sony cameras, talk about that resolution. Somebody else was also asking about the high resolution of the R4 and also high ISO, but let's talk about resolution first.
Okay.
You're thinking of the A1.
So resolution for me is my resolution and ISO performance are my number one kind of edge to edge consideration when I get a camera. So when it comes to the resolution, I print huge images. If you can see just over my shoulder here, this is one of my shots. It's a pano and it's 6 feet long. I like to shoot and print big things. So I consider high resolution for that. Now, not everybody needs that. Like, I'll be 100% transparent. You don't always have to go for the highest resolution cameras, because it really depends on what your end goal is going to be. If it's wall art, resolution really helps. If it's online social media, smaller print size, then you don't need these huge resolution cameras, but they come in handy. Or you're talking about cropping, talking about just getting a little bit closer to an animal with the crop factor, with going into the crop factor modes in some of these cameras, super helpful. The A1 is definitely high on my list. I have just converted to Sony in the last year, so all my money's been invested in the R3 and the R4. So it'll be a little bit of time before I can earn enough to get the A1, but that A1, like having that frame rate, be able to shoot so fast at such a high resolution, that is like a wildlife photographer's dream camera, to be able to shoot fast at a high res and not like freeze up. That is the holy grail for me. So definitely excited to hear about the stories that Charlotte's had with this camera. I just can't wait to see it in real life too. But yeah, resolution helps for sure.
What about ISO? It's kind of a challenging question. So Jenna specifically asked, what's the max-ish ISO that you would safely go up to? And then your lowest safe shutter speeds. So
definitely, that's a tricky one. For anything with wildlife, on my cameras, on the R4 and the R3, I typically won't go above like 10,000 because the noise starts to be a little bit too much to control in things like Photoshop or Lightroom. But that being said, I've seen photos that have shot at huge ISOs and still recovered and do just fine for social media or going online on a portfolio. I'm considering everything I'm looking through the lens of is printing. I'm thinking about if somebody were to stand in front of this. So high end, 10,000, but I would play with your camera. I would go out and take shots with your camera in a mixed bag of lighting scenarios and see what looks good to you. And don't just look on your tiny little LCD screen, bring it up on a computer and look at what that looks like on the computer. And that will give you a kind of a feeling for that. And for shutter speed, it's going to be situational. But anything that's moving, it's got to be a higher shutter speed. So for the birds in flight, I'm at least 1/3200, over 1,000 minimum. I'm pushing it really for something moving, especially with wings. Birds, those wings are moving really fast, so it's easy for those to blur. But sometimes that can make a really interesting photo. I have a shot where the head's sharp, but the wings are all kind of motion blurred. It looks really cool. So, there are some benefits to that blur. Animals that are not moving so quickly or that are posted up, you can get away with those lower shutter speeds to help out with things like your ISO or your aperture. So, a bear sitting or even a bird sitting on a perch, you don't have to have crazy fast shutter speeds.
Great. So kind of on the same subject, Angela was asking, she's an A7R3 user and she's considering the A7R4. So this is perfect for you and your experience, but she said she's heard about problems with high ISO. And do you find that high ISO is an issue when shooting, earlier or later in the day with lower light situations?
I haven't seen it personally. Like I have seen, certain scenarios challenging, right? Overcast day, really dark, forest shooting into the bush. Situational again. I haven't seen a lot of troubles with it. The lens choice is going to affect that as well. So I think in terms of the experience, I would recommend, if possible, if it's a camera that you can rent in your area, try renting it out, getting hands-on with it, seeing how it performs in the scenarios you like to use it in. That's what I've done in the past with some cameras, just kind of getting a feel for the camera or lenses. That is a huge benefit, to being able to just know what you're getting into before actually spending the cash. But I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that a lot of time people are just pixel peeping, and in general, it's actually a great image. It's still completely usable.
Yeah, I would definitely reiterate all that. I haven't heard of issues with going up to 60 megapixels on the R4, but the larger megapixels on the R3 and the even larger megapixels on the A7 III at 24 megapixels, is better at light capture. So, I think looking at it on paper, you can possibly make an assumption that an R3 is better at high ISO than R4, but I haven't seen anything concrete with much experience. I think R4 users have been just continuously blown away by the resolution of the camera. And if there's a trade-off there, I think, everyone is loving those 60 megapixels. So I think I'll do one more question here, and it's kind of on the subject of resolution. Mimi is asking, do you sharpen in post-processing, and what are you using for post-processing?
Great question. Definitely doing some sharpening. I find that with the lenses that I'm using, like the 200 to 600, they're a great lens. They are pretty darn sharp given the right scenarios. The right lighting, like that Silhouette Owl, like great lighting, great moment, super sharp. But there's limitations to the amount of light that's coming in, and those moments can add a little bit of softness. So definitely sharpening. I use typically Photoshop to sharpen. I know there's programs out there like Topaz that are really boasted as doing a great job. One of my friends uses it constantly to sharpen their images, and he gets great results. So I've played with it a little bit, but not a lot. I'll get into that and see how that works. But I use Photoshop and its sharpening tools in Camera Raw. Same tools are in Lightroom. Those are what I use to sharpen, and a couple other like actions that I do to help. But I also find that I'm trying to develop a style, and part of that style right now is I really like kind of the whimsical look. So a touch of softness actually kind of helps in keeping it kind of that whimsical feel. So it's a delicate dance or balance for sure.
Great. Last comment, not really a question. Amy says, thanks for sharing. She would love to do one of your summer workshops. She says they look amazing. Tell us what you have going on in the future. What's on radar? You got workshops on your schedule?
Definitely.
Let's hear some optimism about our futures.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for the compliment. Yes, I'm doing some workshops. It's been touch and go over the last year. I actually canceled all my workshops from last year just because of how things were going. But things are looking better. Travel isn't quite there yet. But for people that are, are able to travel or are local, offering workshops to go out to places like Banff National Park, going out to Jasper National Park, where we'll see all sorts of amazing landscapes and wildlife. So do some astro, and if we're really lucky, maybe some northern lights. Mike has definitely wanted to see those. And have you caught them up here yet?
I have not. 3 trips to the Canadian Rockies, and I have yet to see them.
Fingers crossed.
So,
these workshops are amazing. A great way to just, see what we have available, what we have to offer in Canada. Beautiful places to explore, and just to get out and hike. For the future, some of the things I'm doing, part of the focus for me and awareness for wildlife is working with companies and doing donations and charity work. So a lot of the companies that I work with, or not work with, but help bring awareness to. Companies like Polar Bears International, they're an organization out of Churchill where we, they research the impact of climate change on the bears and research the bears themselves. So right now, any print for polar bears out of my collection, half the proceeds go straight to them for raising funds for research. And as well, World Wildlife Foundation, of course, they have their hands in all sorts of, huge conservation efforts, whether it's the oceans, whether it's forests, animals, you name it, and they have a way to help impact for the better. So I work towards, any sales or funding that I can put towards them. I do that. And exploring my backyard to what the future holds right now is enjoying what I've got around me, and going out and trying to find new challenges in their backyard. We've all got wild animals in the spaces that we live. They'll all just be different shapes and sizes, but still fun to photograph and get out there and enjoy the moment that we have. And I think that's what we can hold on to for the moment and until things change, and maybe getting to know ourselves and our surroundings that much better.
Well, thank you so much, David. I think everyone really enjoyed the session, and of course your imagery and your wise words. So thank you so much. Quick reminder, if you're watching us on YouTube, we do shut down for a quick second, but then we come right back up live and we'll be there with Charlie Savely. So definitely come right back, refresh your home screen and you'll see there. David, definitely jump into the chat. There's probably some unanswered questions that I may have missed. So definitely go hear them and look at all the good compliments you got and all that stuff. Again, I'm Michael Hollander. Thank you all for joining. We will see you in just a couple seconds with our next session. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.